Okay, it's recording.
All right.
We have bad news, folks. So we lost the connection with JM and Jean-Martin Fortier. And as a result, we were continued recording and our system said we continued recording, but the company we use, it did not take for some reason. And they were not able to recover it. They were able to see that the recording happened. And we're so disappointed because we've been really looking forward to this interview with JM for many months. So what Coleman and I are going to do is recount as best we can right after the interview while it's fresh in our mind, the things that JM shared with us. And we're, again, really sorry, so disappointed. It was our first chance to get to talk face-to-face with Jean-Martin, and it was just incredible. We really love his mission, love what he's doing, admire all that he's accomplished, and really wanted to share that with you. So hopefully we'll have another chance to connect with him in person, face-to-face anyway in the future. You know, technology is great until it isn't. And that's where we are today. So we're trying to recover that by sharing with you what we got from the interview in an abbreviated fashion, since it's just us talking and you don't have the lovely J.M. Fortier himself. So, okay, so what we remember, basically we started asking him, well, first of all, we just wanted to congratulate him on his incredible success with his book, The Market Gardener. And I did misspeak, which was later corrected. It was not published in 2014. The copy that we have has copyright 2014, but it was actually first published in 2012, 6 years ago, basically. So almost 7 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And so JM we started out by asking him, saying that we wanted to talk about how backyard farming can be productive and profitable, and for him to share his journey of earning 6 figures per year on just 1.5 acres. And he's also has done this all along from the beginning with his wife and partner. Let's see if I can pronounce her name even close to the correct French pronunciation, Maud Helene, and that's her first and middle name, Maud Helene. And I think it's Desroches.
Desroches.
Yes. So unfortunately, we don't have JM's lovely lyrical French accent to convey that to you. But
he does, by the way, live in southeast of Montreal, near the New York State and Canadian border. So he's sort of in southern Quebec. Just as a part of orienting you guys.
Yeah. And so the thing that we were talking about getting from his book is just incredible journey of basically what he brings to the Market Gardener and to presentations and interviews like this is he started out kind of as an entrepreneur as a teen. So he brings a business sense and savvy into farming. And so we're many small farmers and gardeners seeking to become small farmers, backyard gardeners, micro farms, etc. Fail is we love to grow, but we don't like the business of it. And so in a way, you have to fall in love with all of it. And JM brings a lot of perspective on how to do that. And it is about building community, building relationships, working with the plants, and then seeing that your plants and what you've grown gets to a public. Essentially. And so he talked a lot about the relationships that are a part of his farm, and we'll touch on that again in a little bit. But not so many, the thing about profitable farming, and many farms fail, but what we did talk about is that many businesses also fail. So the statistics are that 50% of businesses of all kinds, so across the board in the United States, fail the first 5 years. And 33% of businesses fail after 10 years. And part of the reason, I mean, there are always all kinds of reasons, but so often it's because people don't know fully what they're getting into when they go to do it. And so it's like one of the reasons we wanted to have this interview, because we know there's so many people who love farming, love gardening, and would like to do it for some revenue, either supplemental or exclusive income or retirement income. and some just to support their family and to supplement their food bill. So we're going to talk about all of that during this recap of the failed video recording with JM, author of The Market Gardener. So the rest of that title, by the way, is The Market Gardener, a successful grower's handbook for small-scale organic farming. And it is very much a handbook because there's just basically everything you need to know about what to do and how to do it, all the way down to not only how many vegetables are produced in his garden, 1.5 acre garden, but how it's laid out, how many bed rotations per crop, etc. So it's very dense with wonderful information, and we love it and recommend it all the time. So you want to go next, Coleman, with what we had talked about?
We got into a little bit of how JM started out, and he said he was just out of college and enjoying life. He was a sports guy. He loved snowboarding and skiing. He was really into the life, so to speak. And he met a lady in college that eventually became his wife, and they traveled down. They wanted to do something. They were studying about ecology and environmental studies in school, and he said it became kind of depressive. It just wasn't, there were a lot of bad things going on, and they were just trying to figure out what they could do. So they took off and went to Mexico and worked a farm down there for a period of time and saw farms and visited with growers in that area. And then they made another trip up to the Santa Fe area where they met up with a fellow who was an organic farmer. And this was, I'm presuming about 18 years ago or so. And at the time, there weren't that many organic farmers. So you had a situation where this fellow was well known in the Santa Fe area and was something of a hero because he was actually out there doing it, producing food, supplying the restaurants, just doing all kinds of incredible growing operations. And they got to basically learn from this guy on an apprentice type level by working his farm. And for a couple years, in fact, and what JM realized, he was putting in $2,000 and $3,000 every day into the cash box. And he was saying, this is pretty cool. This is pretty neat. And he decided that he would take on another role and began managing another farm that was in the area. And we stopped and asked him, well, it sounds like you had a situation where you were an apprentice and then you graduated to maybe journeyman status. Would you recommend this? And he effectively said, yes, you need to somehow learn if you don't know, if you haven't had experience, because so many of the traditional farming was passed down from generation to generation with tons of knowledge and wisdom, but his parents were just sort of hippies living in the suburbs, and he had no training in that regard. So what he did was he learned how to farm, and he learned how to do it organically, and then took on the job of a manager. His opinion was that there was no better way to learn about this kind of farming, I guess any kind, than to do it, than to just get in and do it, especially if you can do it at someone else's expense. It's not your investments on the line. You're there and you're helping, you're learning, and you're learning how to do it as you're being mentored along. So it's not to say you don't start a project or be thinking about a project, but it's always good to get some of that training, some of that knowledge and experience of what it's like. And as we've discussed before, it's work. It's very hard work. It's long hours. It's working in all kinds of seasonal conditions, with bugs, with rain, with things that aren't turning out right. So it's not an easy easy route to take, although it's very rewarding, and because you are out in nature and you are, you know, interacting with the soil and the plants and the elements. So it does have a lot to do with making a connection, as Leora stated early on. So he sort of noticed that you could actually farm on a small plot of land with not very high-tech equipment, very low-tech, no tractors, no big you know, big sprayers and things like that, and decided that if they could start up without much money, they would find some land. And this story is actually detailed in his book as to, you know, the whole chain of events that brought them to where they are. But I think he said something very important about his motivation. He was saying that feeding people good, healthy food and making a business at the same time is the greatest thing. And he was very thankful that he had come to that position of being able to do that. So he struck us as very dedicated to the cause of local, low-tech farming and serving a community and building a community through the medium of growing food.
Yeah. So he's still growing on just 1.5 acres on his original farm. And we'll put the name of that in the, let's see, Le Jardin de la Grillette.
We're butchering.
Yeah, we're butchering
French,
it. So sorry about that. Sorry about this whole thing as far as not having him. We're just really disappointed again not to have him here telling you his story. So we're doing a best recap we can. But at any rate, he has, in the beginning, like we asked him how long before he was profitable. And he said, or really profitable, doing really well. And he said it took about 4 years to get to the point of the 6-figure revenue. That doesn't mean 6-figure profit, but approximately earning 6 figures on 1.5 acres from farming, and about 50% of that was profit. So during that time, their sales were about 65% to CSA, community supported agriculture, and 35% to farmers market. Now it is reversed, where it's about 40% to CSA and 60% to farmers markets. That's
with a little chefing thrown in there.
Yeah, and a little bit of chefing, right? And what he likes about the chefing is it's pretty much there's more year-round customer base. He gets to go in and meet the chefs and enjoy the food at the restaurant as well. So that's like a side gig. I don't remember what he said about profitability with restaurants. Do you?
No.
Okay.
I don't believe we covered that.
Okay. So we asked, so about how many hours of work per day or week? And basically, you know, farmers should expect to be working about 60-hour work weeks. You know, in the garden, there's just so much, as well as between the garden, the growing, and the farmers markets. However, he chose not to grow year-round in greenhouses. He said that they grow from about March through,
They stop at the end of December.
At the end of December. So basically January and February, they're not growing, and they use that time to maintain any equipment and take care of the tools and get everything really ready to go. When busy season starts in spring, it's getting to be a buggy time of day. So we're batting mosquitoes and stuff. So at any rate, and that they also use that as a downtime for family vacations. That's the time that he does writing of books and that sort of thing. And he really likes that lifestyle of knowing that, you know, there will be a couple months after the, you know, 9 to 10 months of busy growing season for a little bit of downtime, family time, traveling south to warmer climates for vacation. So that works for them.
And by the way, that he mentioned doing the apprenticing thing, working on another farm, getting a feel for it, because maybe after a year or less, people get tired of it. They realize how much is involved in it, And maybe it was a dream, and maybe facing reality kind of brought them up short, and they go on to find other things that they can do, because it is, it's difficult. It's not an easy path to take if you want to be a marketing, full-fledged gardener out there growing and selling produce.
Yeah, so we asked which avenues of markets were more profitable, and it varies. It's not just a simple answer. The CSAs, JM's farm serves their 1.5 acre production farm, serves about 200 families and has for many years. And he said that you cannot replace the building of community relationships and networks and goodwill that come from serving families in CSAs. When I asked about which was more labor intensive, it seemed like CSAs can be more labor intensive because we haven't done it ourselves, but we have seen other farmers, spending lots of time packaging boxes, delivering them to places around town, different drop-off and pickup points, and they got rid of all that. What they've done is, instead of having lots of farm workers packing lots of boxes, they have 200 families. That's, times two, that's, hands to come in and pack their own boxes. So basically, his farm delivers the produce to one central area, or on the farm itself, and then the people come and box their own, basically.
And they're given a limit, of course, like you can pick 4 of this and a dozen of these. And so people have the feeling that they're actually engaged in the actual farming because they're picking out their own produce. So it's just brilliant.
But they were picking it. They had already harvested it, right? And they were picking it like from a room,
it's sort of in bulk, and they're just selecting their own food, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I'm sure, and it's like the people almost feel like they're, like you said, like they're harvesting it themselves. They get to come to the farm and have the interactions, and it's just saved them so much time. And so from that standpoint, it's made the CSA, so the difference, the farmer's market, you get more sold at once, but the benefit of the CSA is that you get the money up front, because many CSAs are subscription by either in advance for the whole season or month by month, like paying at the beginning of the month for that month. And so that's an advantage to the farmer to have the money up front. And including some of the things that happen at farmers markets is sometimes, especially in Quebec, where JM lives, you could have, and it could happen anywhere, of course, where you have inclement weather and the market could be closed for a weekend. And, if you're bringing in $3,000 to $5,000 on a Saturday, as he indicated they are, then that's a huge chunk of revenue that's shot just like that. Whereas with the CSA, it's steady. People still come to pick it up when they can get there to pick it up, within a time parameter for the week. So that was one of the disadvantages of farmers markets, is you get the money on the day you're there, not in advance, and something could go wrong. So, there are pros and cons to each. He's been doing both for all these years, and it's worked out really well, and they're still continuing to do both.
Attached to what happens if, somehow the market doesn't happen. Lior asked a great question about, well, do you have any value-added products like, salsa or anything like that? And his comment was, we're actually looking to do less, not spending more time on value-added stuff. And it just takes so much to regulation-wise to meet the requirements of having a clean, the kitchen and the whole processing stream. It's just too complicated. So he's just keeping it simple and looking for ways not to do as much.
And this is a really important point that we're going to actually expand on a little bit more than we did in the actual interview, because I, in particular, am really good at creating more work than I have time to do for myself and my whole family. I'm really good at doing that. And I know that I'm not alone, that many gardeners are busy bees. We like to be industrious. We like to be creative. We like to make things. We like to do things. We have tons of ideas. And that's fantastic because we're industrious, productive people. But we really do, in particular, when it comes to doing it for a living or supplemental income versus just as a hobby, really need to take the time to ask ourselves, is this the best use of our time for the return of the dollar. Because what can so easily happen is we can get overwhelmed and overworked, and then it's no longer fun. If we're trying to tend the garden, harvest the vegetables, get them to market, and then also getting all the things made before getting to market. So something to consider. Now, there are areas where the production of value-added products, like the making of jams or pickled products or what have you, is not as highly regulated, especially for farmers markets where you can do it in your home kitchen. So if that's the case for you and that's what you enjoy doing, then, by all means, it makes sense. If it's more complicated for you in your area and it requires, getting certified and all that, that may be something to, again, rethink in terms of how busy you're going to be creating all those things. There's another way to do that. In fact, we just spoke with a local Nikki,
Right.
who pickles and makes incredible pickles and sells them at farmers market, amongst other things.
Right.
She has a garden, but it's a small one, right?
Right. And she actually, she utilizes the produce from the local growers. And there's a great interface there. People who have extra radishes, for instance. She's a specialist in pickled radishes. She's welcoming all growers to come and she'll convert their radishes into delicious value-added pickles. So there are a lot of ways to go with that, and she's got she just started her own factory. She just opened a factory, so she started on a little countertop, and now she's expanding. And
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
fantastic!
Yeah, it's just.
Good for Go Nikki.
Yeah,
Go
Nikki.
Nikki. But one of the things, though, that made me bring that up is you may not want to be the one to make the pickles, but you can sell your produce to someone who is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want to make the value-added products, so find out who's making those locally in your area. If your certification is required, they're already certified, and then see if you can sell your items to them. For instance, if she makes pickles, then she needs radishes, dill, and onions, and even garlic. So it could even be a package deal selling all the produce to that maker. So that's an idea as well. Let's see what else.
Well, I could say one thing. We talked about apprenticeships, and he's very much, JM is very much into sharing the knowledge, particularly from his platform that he's been involved in the past 18 years of, he made one comment about there is no top to the mountain. He's constantly learning. He's constantly finding out new methods. He doesn't just sit back and rest on his laurels. He's out there doing worldwide tours, interacting with people. He's also expanded into a 7-acre farm. There was a bit of a backstory on that, but he's working now in developing a demonstration project for an organic farm that demonstrates that this can be grown locally on a 7 to 8 acre basis. And it was amusing because he said, after we have the interns and we get all the administration and all that paid, we're actually making less money on 7.5 acres than we are on our 1.5, all total, which is a very interesting comment.
I think it was not less money, but it was less profit.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
Far less profit.
Less profit because there's so much more overhead. And as you increase, it gets bigger. But he said the biggest problem, the missing link right now in the whole farming industry, particularly we're talking small farms and local farms, is we're missing the seasoned young farmers, those that actually know how to do a farm, know how to do the management, and have the skills. So this is one of his missions. He wants to train apprentices. He has a program that he's setting up, and you can go on his website. I believe it's themarketgardener.com.
Yeah.
And he has details up there about all the things that he's looking to do to get this momentum going with more and more gardeners young people in particular getting into the business and learning how to do it. Now, we pose the question or the prospect that there are aging farmers out there that have farms, that have land,
or people that
or
have
people
land,
that have the land,
who've been working in corporate or wherever their jobs are, Dr. Flores, whoever,
Right.
and have land and are interested in hobby farming.
right? And yet they may hobby farm a bit, but they don't have a time, or they may have something of a farm business that their children are not at all interested in continuing, and they'd rather sell the land. So what we're looking at is a lot of opportunity for young people to find places. They don't have to go out and buy land. They can lease it, or they can, go to a person that has a farm that's a hobby farmer and say, look, I want to help you out. Let me work land. I'll learn, and then you can show me what you know, and we'll build this relationship. What's important, bottom line, is that more and more people learn how to grow food, and not just on a massive scale, but healthy, organic, locally sourced, the kind of farming that builds up the soil, sustainable, if you want to say. But it's this project of JM's. He wants to just get more people with their hands in the dirt and having an interaction and growing stuff. His book gets into that a good bit about his philosophy, and he's a very sensible young man, and has, I think, just very attainable goals. And he's actually doing. He's not just saying people should do this. He's actually out there. He has apprentices. He's showing he has a master program he's going to be working on. Details are on his themarketgardener.com site. So that was
So a really key takeaway to re-emphasize this, because he thinks it's very important. If you have a chance, if you're thinking about getting into market gardening or farming for profit, micro farming, small scale, and you haven't done it yet, and you, in particular, whether you have land or don't have land, he highly recommends apprenticing, interning, working for someone who is already doing it, to really get your feet not wet but dirty, to get your hands, dig in the soil, and make sure it's for you. He says that they have people that come and work for them, and after a year they're all gung-ho, and after a year they decide it's not for them. Conversely, others dive in and decide that that's what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So if you're not sure and you have a chance to work for a local farmer, then that's his recommended way to do it. I think many of the people in our Gardens-All and Planting for Retirement audience are going about it being gardeners for their family, and then expanding to the point where they actually have enough to sell.
Right, and he also mentioned, and we'll get into the questions, I think. We did ask him about, well, what is it that you see as the biggest failure among people starting off and getting in?
Hang on, can I get back to the farming thing for a second?
Yeah.
So, because I wanted to talk about farm job opportunities, as well as wages and that sort of thing. So JM said that in their area, they pay their interns, or their farm, did he call them interns? Apprentices.
Yeah.
About $12 an hour, which he said is not enough to make, a great living. But our perspective is that if you're going to, learn while you're earning, then that's a win-win. So, and that if you think you want to garden for a living and you're a young person just getting started, or know a young person, whether it's your child or grandchild, then what better way to figure that out than to live and work on a farm, get paid so earning while learning, and then decided that's what you want to do the rest of your life or for your career. So that's a fantastic way, like you mentioned. So he can only take 10 apprentices per season, and he gets filled up because that's all he's equipped to handle. But because they always have more applicants than they're able to take, he is creating this master course, which we will link to his site, where that information will be made available once the program's available. And what they're doing is they're now doing video recordings of the lessons and the training that they're doing with the apprentices, so that they can share those videos and those lessons to a wider audience worldwide. So that'll be wonderful. And I don't know how much that will be, but that'll be available. Check back on his website periodically, and we'll certainly link to it when we can, when it's available. So back to the wages, though. Farmers, he said, it's really hard as a small farm to pay a farm manager. That it has to be a bit bigger farm, unless you are back to the hobby farmers or gentleman farmer, where, gentleman, gentlewoman, where you have another income, or you have another livelihood, and this doesn't need to be your exclusive income, but it's something you want to do. Maybe you love living on a farm, you want to have fresh food for you and your family, but you don't have the time or the physical ability, but you have the land and you have enough money to pay someone. Or actually, the point is, you could have a working farm making a small profit and still pay someone, but it might not be enough for you to live on. So, but if you didn't need it, if you had another job, or you had savings because you were retired, and you just wanted to have fantastic fresh vegetables and food available year round, then you could definitely hire a farm manager to do it for you, and still make a profit and have the food. So, that's just another, there's so many scenarios. Speaking of that, we have had people ask us if, so we have one lady in the Planting for Retirement group that has a back acre or two that she wants to know if someone would like to farm it. I don't know where she's located, so we'd have to find that out in case someone asks us for her to connect with her. So she has extra land that she would love for somebody to farm. And so there are situations like that where people want to farm but don't have land, and people have land but don't want to or can't farm the whole thing. She has her own small garden, and she's not capable or needing to farm the rest of it. So there are scenarios out there that if you really want to do it, you can.
Right.
So to consider that. What was the other thing? That some farmers farm managers for larger farms could make as much as $50,000 to $80,000 a year. Do you remember what size?
50 to 80,000. He said on smallish farms, probably not the kind of organic farm he has.
So
Because
it'd be 5 acres probably or more, 6, 7, the 7-acre farm, the new farm that they're doing, he said is about $1 million revenue a year, right? But where on the small farm, the 1.5 acre plot, it's the profit that they get to keep is about 50%. So they are now making about, what did he say, 100,000 per acre. So on a 1.5 acre, the revenue is 150,000, and they get to keep about half of that, so 75,000. And however, on the 7-acre farm where they have bigger, 12 employees essentially, then it's a much smaller profit margin. I don't think he said what it was, but it's definitely less than the 50%.
And we didn't ask him about this, but of course you have the benefit of working outside, physical exercise, doing the farm work, and great food. So it's
as a part of the
lifestyle.
perks, as the perk of working.
He said you don't worry about going to a bar in the evening. You just want to get in bed and go to sleep.
So it's a clean lifestyle and it keeps you out of trouble. Right. Well, clean dirt.
There's a question that came up about what causes, based on his experience, what causes, common causes are there to a farm's failure? And the first thing he just immediately said was equipment, particularly tractors.
And let me just interrupt you again to preface this, because what started out as just sort of a simple question, we got an unexpected answer with quite a long philosophical perspective to it. Very, not long so much as deep, I should have said.
Right. And he said the thing about a tractor, once you get the tractor, everything begins to center around the tractor. The building to store it in, we can put a cultivator on it and do long rows, or we could do a harrow thing here, or we can, everything starts to scale up to what the tractor can do. And he says what happens there, it then becomes more about the machine than actually being down on your knees and working with the plants and being very close to what all is going on and actually interacting with the soil. It's just a different kind of thing, and it can lead people into thinking they're more productive, but they're actually not so closely involved in the whole process, which can cause issues with, not seeing what's going on with, say, a pest problem or a disease problem or plants suffering from lack of water, that sort of thing. Whereas if it's a small scale, it's like you know more about those plants directly than just gliding by on a machine looking down and seeing what you're doing as you're making a straight row. He said that's just kind of a hole people fall into, and the whole farm gets organized around the machine. The next thing he said is that.
Are you going to move from the machine to something else?
Yeah.
Okay, and let me pause you there, because the other thing, I don't think you mentioned this part. He talked about, when you're on the machine, you're also disconnected from the soil and disconnected from the plants.
Right.
So if you're down there working with it, then you're touching the plants, you're touching the soil, you're connecting to the earthworms even, and it's almost like there's that connection on a really almost deep and spiritual level that touches you, and what touches you touches the plants. I think most gardeners can relate to this. I don't think it's a woo-woo kind of thing. It's just more like what being out in nature does for us. And when you're on a tractor, sorry guys, because Coleman, this is the thing. Sorry. Most guys want to get into farming because they're going to get a tractor, and we get that. Men and machines, we get that. But when it comes to the soul of the garden, being connected to nature and not being separated from the nature of what we're growing with the loud, big, smelly machine,
right.
That just kind of creates a disruption, and you don't have the bird sounds, you don't have the connection with the nature, the pollinators, and all of that.
Right, and you get into larger scale, and some tractors have enclosed booths where you have a sound system and air conditioning. It just kind of gets wild
and
after
Coleman
a while.
Used to have a tractor, so
and
he's a recovering tractor addict.
We really needed it for landscaping.
yeah, you did.
Okay, on to the next thing. The next thing that he mentioned was that people get overwhelmed. They get too much property, they plant too much, they get into situations, say, in the mid-season where they just cannot keep up with the harvest. The bugs come in, everything starts to happen where there are just too many things going on that the would-be farmer has to deal with. He said, no, that happens to everybody at some point in time. Everyone who farms has that experience. But for the people starting out, it can really just be a kind of a terrifying loss of control. The garden takes over and becomes in control of things. Sort of nature takes over, and you are not in control anymore. And that's a kind of helpless feeling. And quite often, it causes a lot of loss in terms of plant loss and loss in terms of enthusiasm. A lot of people just cash in their chips after an experience like that. Let's see. Now, he was talking about getting the top of the mountain. There is no top to this mountain that we're all climbing.
Yeah, so he's been gardening now, started at 22 as the intern apprentice kind of role, and now he's 40. So basically, like Coleman said, 18 years. And what he's excited about is that even though he's been gardening for almost 2 decades now, he's still learning. It's almost like the more he knows, the more he realizes there's yet to learn. And so that's part of where he is right now, is on this learning journey, that there's just, don't get started and think you know something and that's the way it is. And he had a good point. He said, so think about it. If you plant potatoes, there's one potato planting per season.
Right.
And if you've gardened for 18 seasons, then you still only planted potatoes 18 times. So that means that there are still things that, and typically what we've done is we do what we did before if it worked, but that doesn't mean that there might not be an even better way.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of
Yeah.
that process of keeping up the learning journey, which is, I mean, part of why we're doing Gardens All and sharing with you guys and learning from you, as well as the Planting for Retirement group, where people really help each other with their growing. You know, and it's like what we're doing now. It's like what neighborhoods used to be like, where you know, neighbors help neighbors, and you
Right.
share notes, you talk over the fence about what is and isn't growing. And you know, in today's society where people aren't necessarily as able to be connected, and some people have yard gardens and their next door neighbor might be just growing grass, then it's really helpful to connect with online communities like Gardens All, and again, to pick up books like The Market Gardener, because, and this is what, as I mentioned in the very early part of the video snippet that we did capture, this is like a decade of experience in one place. And that's really priceless. So, you know, if you haven't gotten this already, it's one of the best books out there you could get for gardening and growing.
Some of the other highlights that we had, you know, he says it's part of the thing he's discovering, as we all likely know, is that part of learning is actually teaching. So he's learning so much just from the action and being out there and answering questions and teaching, which, I mean, we learn a lot too here at Gardens All from the questions that come from you all. And we definitely don't know everything, but we're willing to do our best to go seeking out the answers if we can, and thereby we learn. He's also thinking about better farm designs and better harvesting procedures. There's some new tools out there. He's beginning to move from light tilling to more biological tilling using earthworms and such, and not disturbing so much of the soil. He wants to show some of the methodologies. We had questions come in too, and let's see if we can kind of duplicate what we
can. Just while you're pulling up, I've got mine here, but you had asked the question about how important is it to be farming near a population center.
Yeah.
And so, and did you take note on his answer in that?
Yeah, he basically said, it was surprising. He said it's really not that important, because what you're establishing is a community of people that know you, like you, and it could be a CSA, it could be, you know, if you're in a totally isolated area, like somewhere in the heart of Wyoming or somewhere where you don't have any neighbors around. But he says it works pretty well just on the basis of having people interested in good, healthy food. And once the word gets out, you become a known entity, and folks tend to look to you. He said they had people that have been with them for like 18 years since their CSA started up. And, you know, there's this bond, there's this thing of, oh, you're our farmer. You know, you're our guy, our go-to guy for the best food around. And, you know, that sort of tracks back to very, very historical times when, you know, certain farmers were known for certain things, and people would go to them to procure certain crops and whatnot. But he's just very clear about, you don't need to live near a big city. You know, there are trends and things like that would be helpful. Maybe some of the markets would be helpful, but don't sell yourself out just to live in or near a big city to do this. Was there anything else in that?
Relative to location, no. Well, I had mentioned there that there are, you know, so an example of where that could be a problem. One of the Planting for Retirement group members, Facebook group members, Sarah Brackney, lives in the Amish country of Indiana, and what she discovered at Farmers Market is it's really hard to sell, because all the Amish do their own gardening, so if you're a large part of your population are Amish and they're already selling at the market and growing their own, then it's hard to compete with that and get a foothold.
Mm-hmm.
So what she did notice, though, is that the closest mushroom grower was 75 miles away. So she started learning how to grow experimentally first oyster mushrooms, and we'll link to that article as well. But anyway, that would be an example of a workaround. So if you find an area that it's hard to grow a certain thing, or it could even be that you could end up growing mushrooms and selling dried mushrooms on Amazon. So, for instance, if Sarah sells fresh mushrooms and the ones that don't sell in a given week, she ends up drying, then she can sell them dried locally at the farmer's market, and they last up to 2 years, or even online through a website or Amazon. So there are other options if you don't seem to be in the best location. I know another one of the Planting for Retirement members, Deborah, has an issue with where she is. So there could be some options for you there. Okay, so then the first question that came in from the audience of Planting for Retirement, Shannon Billings, said, I'd love to know if this process of sell, invest meager profits back for more to sell is going to work. And JM said you may not like his answer to that question, and we made it clear that truth is not always easy. It's not always what we want to hear, but it's what we need to hear. And so he said also that this is just his perspective. So there may be other perspectives. But in his mind, and he has a good business mind, so I think it's really well worth heeding his advice on this, and at least considering it relative to your personal circumstance. And that is that, let's say that you wanted a greenhouse, so you could get an early start and grow early, and you needed to borrow $40,000. That was going to be the cost of the greenhouse. He said if you were growing full scale in a greenhouse, and let's say you happen to have actually, he said first, $40,000, and you put that $40,000 into the greenhouse, he said you could make $40,000 back in the first year, and then from there on, that greenhouse would be paid for. Similarly, if you were to take out a loan, and currently loans are at a pretty low interest rate, and so let's say that you've got a 5% loan, and on a $40,000, now you're just paying 5% for the year. That's the yearly rate. So the monthly rate is less than that, and you're still selling more at market each month. You wouldn't want to do that if you didn't already have a setup to grow and you weren't sure you wanted to do it. So he made it clear that recommendation to take out a loan for necessary equipment only would work if you were definitely sure that you were going to commit to being a farmer.
Right. And I'm sure he wasn't talking about buying a tractor on credit.
Definitely not.
But just the thought is, I mean, if you look at an overview of his farm, and we'll put that online so you can see what it looks like. It's like a postage stamp, and it's all very, very tightly arranged. The crops are right outside the door where they're living. It is pretty amazing how intense that is. And what he's talking about is with a loan, you go from, having a hoe and digging a line or two, making a little money, and then, in 3 years, a little more, in 4 years, and finally you get to afford a greenhouse that you pay for. He's saying just, intensify the investment. It's not about the equipment, but it's intensifying the investment in what allows you to gain leverage. And again, we're not talking about, 5, 10, 20 acres and a tractor. We're just saying this is a piece of equipment that will, or extend the season, or, he's talking about intensive gardening and intensive small scale farming. In order to do that, you really need to have the capital to put into it. And he's not a huge fan of, if you're going to be a commercial farmer or market gardener, he's not a big fan of starting real tiny and, making a little bit here and a little bit there. It's kind of like, go for it and take out the loan, put the money in it. And that way you're boosting. It's actually a time thing. You're actually saving time by taking that approach.
Now, there could be a situation where to start small would be if you wanted to qualify for a farm loan, like a government assistance loan or whatever. I think you looked at it at one point and we looked into it, and it had to be that you were already farming for what, 3 years? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was actually a grant for a greenhouse, and some of you guys will know it's I think it's NRCS, something like that, NRSC, national grants. They're out there. You can check them out through your ag extension agents. They usually have contacts, or your Division of Agriculture office. But yeah, there are grants out there that, but a lot of times they're rather, and this is not to diss them because they'd probably be good. But some of them, it's like you go to the bank to borrow money and they say, well, how much money do you have in your account? Well, that's why I'm here. It's the same deal with some of these grants. It's like, well, you have to be farming a certain amount of land for a certain amount of time, showing a certain amount of profitability in some instances. So it's kind of tough.
Now, one of the members, Joyce Pinson of the Planting for Retirement group, I think she said she recently got a grant, installed her high tunnel through a government program grant.
And that's specifically their programs out there for high tunnels. They cannot be greenhouses. They have to be high tunnels and have to have more like, a big coal frame. You can't have ventilation. It has to, or mechanized stuff inside. It's basically a coal frame to extend the season, which is, what they'll support and write a grant up for. Yeah.
So Shannon, if you wanted to keep on doing what you're doing and continue to grow your profits, and there was another person that asked a similar question, Kim Reese, I think, or is it Rice, R-E-I-S-S, wanting to know, if this is going to work, basically, to do this small scale on a very low budget, growing a little, making a little, and investing it and growing more. And so that could be one way if you would like to consider applying for a government grant, after 3 years of doing this. And, so Kim, for instance, will be in her second year. So then you're 2 years down, then that could be a way to do it. If you know for sure you want to go large, then just go large. And I don't mean too big, but just, again, that upfront investment. So you're not always scrimping, because if you consider that JM is able to bring in $150,000 on an acre and a half by going all in, then, wouldn't you rather get there within the first year or two, or 3 even, than to wait 10 years, 12 years down the road? The exception to that would be if you're not sure you want to do it all in, and we've already kind of covered that.
Right.
So Amelia Rittner asked, is there a good resource for finding materials to build new garden beds? JM said that it's in his book, basically, but he highly recommends shipping in good soil. Somebody else asked about, let's see, I'll find that in a second. Here we go. Paula Danville, what's the best way to get started with large quantities of good soil and compost if you don't already have good soil? And so Jean Martin recommended definitely go ahead and ship the soil in, because again,
truck it in.
So what we love about this interview is that he's just saying, if you're going to do it right. Don't piddle around. If you're sure you want to do this, because trucking in the soil you need, think of how much, if you don't do that, how you're going to be struggling, how your plants are going to be struggling, how you're not going to be able to grow as much, not going to be able to be as productive, and you're going to be fretting and worrying about it all the time. Whereas if you just go ahead and truck in the soil, he mentioned that some cities have a lot of compost that they need.
Right, they don't know what to do with it.
They don't know what to do with. So it might even be free or inexpensive, and that could be a combination of, it's probably like vegetation, like dumps, where
leaf matter and usually it's just leaf matter that they chewed up, and it's ready to go.
Right.
So
yeah. So definitely check with if you have issues with soil, and we do. We bought a beautiful parcel of property on quite a large hillside fantastic view before we thought about the possibility of farming for profit. And so we weren't really looking at the soil. And of course, it's on a hill that was covered, cleared partly. And the clearing meant that the topsoil washed down the hill. And so we need to recover some of that by bringing in soil, trucking in soil, and in some raised bed scenarios. So definitely do that. You want to go to the next one? Scroll back up. It's, let's see. Heidi is next.
Heidi, okay. Get up here, Heidi Steinbrenner. And she asks, since you're located up in Canada, do you know how their laws and regulations differ from ours in the U.S.? He wasn't specific to the U.S., but he says they have a lot of regulations. There are a lot of things that restrict them from doing, value-added products. Certain things they can't have chickens. There are certain state regulations regarding dairy and cows and all that. So they're just sticking strictly with vegetables because unlike down here where so many of us can, homestead in a way with small animals, apparently that's a big deal up in Quebec. Whether it's in the rest of Canada, I don't know.
I think what he didn't say that was in between the lines there was that organic farming, because he mentioned you couldn't have chickens. I think it probably has to do with organic farmers.
Right, and we know that from
there's some of that here. Yeah, there's definitely some of that here.
And so he's just keeping it simple. He's just saying, okay, well, I'll work within the restrictions and do what we can do. So I hope that's helpful, Heidi.
Yeah, and Debbie Newland, and Planting for Retirement Group, Planting for Retirement Group said, what is the most demanding crop farmers need to grow for public demand? And without hesitation, JM said tomatoes.
Right.
And in particular, when you get into hothouse tomatoes and what have you, that is one of the most demanding to grow, but it's also in the greatest public demand. And she also wanted to know if he knew anyone with a successful wildflower and honey farm business. You wrote down the name.
Yeah, he mentioned a name, Floret. I guess it's spelled Floret, Barnes. That's my scribbly writing. Barnes. We'll
look it up. We'll look it up and link it.
We'll verify that.
It'll be in the article already linked. So we'll look that up and see about it. And he said, yeah, he figured you could do it, but he doesn't have the experience to share personally about that. So let's see, moving on down to Jennifer. And this is now the Gardens All audience questions. Jennifer Liddicote asked if he had heard of successful market gardeners in the northern half of the Canadian provinces, like Saskatchewan.
Specifically.
He mentioned that. And again, she had a poor soil question and what you do with that. So he said yes. That he mentioned one. Did he mention he knew of a couple? Did he mention the name of the farm up there?
No, that he said, of course, their season is shorter, so they have to move faster.
Fast and furious. Fast and furious up there. It's going to be, Jennifer, as you know, it's a short growing season, which means you have a lot of time of the year to plan, and it can be done. So the best bet would be for you to Google farmers in your area, and small farms, micro growers, and just whoever, and also check if you have a farmer's market, then go to it and meet who's there. Yeah,
and consider extending their season with some sort of covering, whether it's a caterpillar tunnel or something like that, that will
definitely
extend at either end.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you want to take on Ida
Slagle. She had a lot of questions, and she was saying, what is your primary market? And he said right now they're doing the farmer's market at about 60% that. About 40% on the CSAs. Do you buy new seeds every year? Yes. And he gave a whole list of primarily Johnny's seeds. He says he just they don't have time to save seeds. So,
and this is a really important lesson. I know that many of our Gardens All and audience and Planting for Retirement group, Facebook group members, really like the saving seed process. There's something about that it feels almost like an insurance policy, and as well as when you consider heirlooms, it's like a legacy thing. And I mean, really, it's like I understand that there are people who have heirloom seeds that are passed down for generations. If you're going to be a market gardener, however, so that might be for your private garden. To be a market gardener, it doesn't work because it takes too much time. And seeds for farmers are some of the cheapest things you could buy. So that's why they don't bother with saving seeds, and they buy new seeds every year. He buys it in the winter. He places his entire order at one time, and then that's done. So that means he's planned out the garden, he's planned out the planting, and he's got his seeds ordered and ready to go.
He mentioned others. Johnny Seeds is his primary, but there's also High Mowing Seeds. They're in the United States. Osborne Seeds, Wild Garden Seeds, and they're probably listed up on his website somewhere. I know it's
We'll list
some
them.
of them
We'll
are,
list
are
them on
listed in
Garden's
his book as well.
Yeah, we'll
in
put
the
them on
appendix.
Gardens. We'll put them on Gardens All site too.
So the follow-up question to that from Ida was, do you use any hydroponic method?
Okay, and he's not a fan of hydroponics. So if you're into hydroponics, that's great. It's not for him. And he said because he really thinks that it's almost like the health of the plants lies in the soil. And we likened it, and perhaps you've heard this metaphor before. We've talked about it on Gardens All before, the correlation between, as scientists beginning to recognize that human health begins and ends in the gut. And the gut is symbolically similar to the soil, where you have the microbes in the soil that contribute to nutrients and cleanse as well, and break down things that need to be broken down in the soil. And so really the health of the plants begins there. And it seems like you're missing that in the hydroponics. We understand it has its place. It seemed to grow well in many cases, and some people love it. So that's your thing, and that's absolutely fine. We're just conveying to you Jean-Martin Fortier's opinion and experience with that.
And somebody, I don't know whether it was us or somebody, just casually mentioned about, well, how do you water your plants? Do you use drip irrigation, or how do you do it? And he says basically they do overhead sprayers because it's simpler. You just do one line down
On the outside garden,
on
in the
outside.
Greenhouses,
Right.
Inside in the greenhouses, they use
Drip.
a drip system.
Right, and outside is just far simpler to lay out a line, have stations where you have your overhead sprinklers, and go from there. You don't have to manage so many tubes, which makes a lot of sense.
Because you've been spending a lot of time in the garden managing the tubes, and you're loving how it works out now. But
Yeah.
It took a lot of setup. We fortunately, well, not fortunately, but because we're in the woods and our amount of space here currently is limited,
Tiny little,
we have a little,
Yeah.
thumbnail, what do you call
Postage
stamp?
stamp.
Thank you. Postage stamp size garden in our lower garden here. And so it wasn't as much to set up. But we can certainly see how that would be way too much if it were a bigger
Oh
operation.
yeah, absolutely, and a lot to maintain.
Yeah.
They tubes clog up and you have issues. Well,
But hang on a second. The good news, I'm thinking that it's reminding me like of microfarming again.
mhm.
And the good news for people with smaller bits of land is that, as we indicated earlier, JM's smaller farm is more profitable than the larger farm. And he's a full-on believer in the micro farm, backyard gardens, etc. Again, most of us, if we could earn, gross revenue of 150,000, net revenue of 75,000 a year on just 1.5 acres, that would be pretty cool. But there's another perspective that he said on that. He said, the reason that pretty much only migrant workers are working in the farms, and people, it's hard. Otherwise, it's been hard to get
on the big farms.
On the big farms,
Yeah.
right? The big farms, it's hard to get U.S. workers to work there, and you get migrant workers coming in. It's because think about it. If you have long rows, almost like the long country road, as long as the eye can see, rows of the same crop, and you don't have the birds, you don't have the butterflies, you don't have the flowers, it's just row after row after row of monotony. Whereas in these like edible landscape, permaculture, bio-intensive kind of gardens, you have so much variety. You have the flowers, the pollinators, the various different crops, all working together, and you don't have the row and the tractor. Instead it's more like living and working in a garden as opposed to a farm row.
Right. It's this industrial thing. It's like you're culling an assembly line essentially.
Yeah.
When you're doing that, and it gets boring. And a lot of workers just aren't into that aspect of it. So it's left to what we've heard people say, the casual labor, to come out and handle that.
Right. So, and the last question that he answered for this interview that didn't make it is, how many farm hands do you employ? And I think we've already answered that, actually, and that's 4 on the 1.5 acre farm and 12 on the 7 acre farm.
Yeah.
So, and part of the 12 and part of the cost of that, it probably costs him more, and I think he said this, because it's also essentially a classroom. It's a farming university, as it were. It's a learning center.
Yeah.
That's the term he used.
Yeah.
And so therefore some of the time is spent teaching as opposed to just working. So if you were just doing a straight farm and you weren't doing the learning center teaching, then perhaps it would be a little more profitable, 12 workers, 7 acres. But it gives you an idea, doesn't it? That if you have an acre and a half, can you do an acre and a half if it's just 2 of you? Probably. But it would be really tough. If you consider that currently an acre and a half that's earning a net profit of $75,000 a year is still requiring about 60 hours per week per person. So the difference, I think, though, is that you're out in the garden, and yes, it gets buggy and it gets hot and it gets cold and it gets rainy. There are times you don't want to be out there doing it. But if you're going to have to be 60 hours someplace, wouldn't you rather be outside in the garden? I know you would.
Oh, take me there.
That's right. And as they say, it's good, honest work, clean work, healthy work, and good for the environment, good for the community.
And we certainly, in encountering Jean Martin today.
Martin.
Martin.
I think.
Martin.
Yeah. Jean Martin.
All right.
Fortier. Yeah.
He's just such a genuine guy, and he definitely is a fellow that has a purpose and believes in what he's doing, and has demonstrated that, sure enough, you can have a really profitable enterprise on a small amount of land. So it's just it's wonderful to know he's out there and he's demonstrating it. He has books that he can share. There's the marketgardener.com, which is full of videos and question and answer type things that come in. So we're sorry we couldn't bring him to you. You have a little bit of an intro, so you get to see him. But he's a genuine guy, and we enjoyed very much meeting him and sharing his story with you.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit of a remake and have him tell you in his own words and lilting accent more of the deeper philosophies and things that he's doing. Perhaps we can have him back when he opens up his masterclass. I think that would be a good time to do that.
Like that.
Yeah, so we'll get to come back. And thanks for sticking in with us. And again, sorry, as Coleman said. And now we know next time what we're going to do is just in case technology fails, we're going to also record it on the phone, and at the very least, we'll be able to bring it to you in the interviewee's voice. So you won't be just stuck with us recounting that great experience, and he really is a great guy. So highly recommend his book, highly recommend checking out his website, and we'll stay tuned. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.